Well, hello again. This is Peter. I'm with Creating Hope Together podcast and going to come to you today. And we're going to do another podcast. We're going to focus in on some mental health type information for you today. I hope you get a lot out of this and just have a chance to kind of see what might be going on in your world. And I did want to say for sure, like my little disclaimer is that this information that we're about to share with you is information that's come to us from a lifetime of dealing with our emotions, things like that, and dealing with these issues. So if any of this really touches you, please go to your medical professional, seek out medical help, and get their advice. It's very important to do that. Don't be ashamed that you have to go in. There's many people that have these issues, but get the help that you need. And please come back here to our podcasts, go online. There's a lot of information there, but definitely seek out that medical help. There's people there ready to help you. And today, hosting with me is um, Rebecca, and I'm going to put it over to Rebecca right now, and we'll get started.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Peter. I'm Rebecca, and I have a podcast, Recover Yourself, and that is available on Spotify and iTunes. I post it on Twitter, Instagram, and yeah, I think that's about it. So, and just to reiterate what Peter said, if this touches you or touches something in you and you'd like to talk about it further, contact your mental health care professionals, or find your online community. You can reach out to us. We can certainly support you in any way that we can. We'll try. And today we are talking about trauma, and that's a word that I think is very large and looms large in a lot of our lives. And I think that it's used in a way that minimizes the import and the vastness of trauma. Some people say, "Oh, that was so traumatizing for me, having to wait in line for 20 minutes for something." People use it in this off the cuff sort of way that diminishes what people who live with chronic, severe, acute, complex trauma live with. So we want to talk about this. We want to break down the different kinds of trauma, and we're going to talk all about it. So diving in, I found that there are I found two different categorizations, let's say, of trauma into types of acute, which is a trauma that results from a single incident; chronic, which is a repeated occurrence of an experience, domestic violence, some sort of abuse, things like that. And then there's complex trauma, which is when one is exposed to some invasive, varied traumatic events. And all of those, I think we experience throughout the course of our lives. Acute trauma, specifically acute trauma, I think is more commonplace. I don't have numbers on that, but I think everybody goes through at least one single instance or incident in their lives that may traumatize them. And the second categorization that I found was in type 1 and type 2. And these different tiers, type 1, are traumas that lead mostly to post-traumatic stress disorder, military combat, violent assaults, violent sexual assaults, severe illnesses, being a victim to violence or a witness to a violent event, natural disasters, medical traumas, suicide attempts, things of that nature. The second type is complex, and this is from the literature rooted in early childhood, in our early childhood development when we're exposed to trauma. So this could be emotional abuse during childhood, domestic violence during childhood, abandonment, verbal abuse, misdiagnosis of a health problem, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, and overly strict religious upbringings can be traumatizing for people. So those are just a few examples, and these are, as I said, early stages of development, repeated over a period of time. We also have some other categories: historical, collective, intergenerational, like slavery or genocide, being the survivor or descendant of a member of a genocide. War, we know from our veterans who served in World War II, Korea, Vietnam, World War I, Iraq, both the Iraq wars, Afghanistan. We know that war is definitely a major player in the incidence of trauma. There's secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. We can be impacted by listening to somebody else's story. If we're an empathetic person, if we're, sympathetic, if we're even listening with an open heart and mind, we can incorporate these things. We take these things in and they affect us. I know personally, I feel that sometimes I'm co-opting somebody else's trauma or sadness, and I beat myself up a little bit about it. But I am I'm eligible, or I'm qualified, or I'm certainly allowed to feel those feelings, right? And then we have they call it in the literature, it's called little t trauma, lowercase t trauma. So losing a job, moving to a new neighborhood, out of a house you lived in for maybe 15 or 20 years, and then moving away to a new house, a different area, a loss of a loved one, maybe a distant relative who you had, intermittent connection with, but it's still a loss. It's a family member, and it's a valid thing. So, despite all these different classifications and demarcations of where trauma starts and stops, where it begins, where it ends, how it's impacted in your life, it's there, and we all in some way experience it, and it's very important to acknowledge. So I'm going to throw it back to Peter to discuss the different stages, I think.
Yeah, that's fantastic information. And I think the biggest key there is identifying what's going on with you, and is it just an anger thing, or is it just like you're mad at something, or um, identifying what these things are is really the key to you to be able to, if you need it, to get the help that's necessary. Doing some research, again, medical doctors, therapists, things like that. Um, these things can be so subtle that we don't really realize what they are, but they're so pervasive in us. They're so built into the foundation of who we are, how we react to the outside world, how we react to family, friends, uh, you know, close people to us, in how our relationships develop. And so it's really important to look at those, acute, chronic, complex. Um, they You could have, the acute, you could continually relive it over and over and over and over again. And then it becomes, because somehow your brain doesn't process, we'll talk about that, your brain doesn't process it properly. And so it's a daily recurring trauma in you. Then it becomes a chronic trauma. I think that then it could go, to through these different stages, kind of fluid. So be very vigilant of kind of what's going on with your own mental health, and really go ahead and attack it and take control of it. And Rebecca, that's fantastic information.
Thank you.
So these stages of trauma, um, first of all, I think probably one that, maybe my middle name should be, is um, denial. Things like, this can't be happening to me. This is not real. This didn't happen. And you're going to find that these stages are very similar to other things that happen in our life. The second stage is the anger stage. Why did this happen to me? Why was I the victim of this particular trauma? Bargaining, um, I will never ask for anything again. If only you will take this away from me, or never do this again, or, then comes the next stage is depression, um, where you just, the dark cloud is always there, and your you take your regular who you are, and then this trauma happens and it affects you, and then you quickly adapt to the trauma and make it part of you. And so that always comes out in all these ways: how we drive, if we road rage, if we how our work performance is, how our relationships go. And then finally, through all this work and all of the process that we can go through, if we take responsibility for the fact that, what, I have this. Now it's up to me to go after it and do the work, find the help. And that's where that acceptance comes in. And once we can accept that part, that's when we start to see the light. That's when we start to see progress. That's where we start to see hope. That's where we start to trust. And they're all there. It's going to happen. Maybe not in that order, but those things are going to be part of the process of our trauma. Um, and really, I looked at what was the definition of trauma? It is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. Kind of a, wow, that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But there's a lot in there. And so those are what I have for the stages of trauma.
Well, thank you for sharing that wonderful information. And I want to jump in, if I may, with we had talked about indicators of trauma. And you said in the depression stage, you said something, you said trauma becomes a part of you. And I think it really, really does. And it becomes a part of you. And just like we show ourselves, whether we want to or not, our physical being, our physical presence is shown, when we walk into a room or we go to the store or whatever we do. And I think that part of the indicators of our trauma come out in this depressive stage. We've got, and I'm thinking specifically about, self-harm behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
When people are cutting or, using and overdose or use to the extent that they get into an accident, and that's a self-injurious behavior, self-harm indicator. I think that, we display how this trauma has become part of us with those behaviors. We've got attachment issues. We've got the physical in the domains of how trauma is indicated. There's attachment issues, there's physical issues, there's affect or mood issues, there's behavior issues, there's cognition. Can we pay attention? Can we be curious about things? Can we focus? Can we process the information that we're taking in? Our self-image, self-concept, shame and guilt about our bodies. All of these things are indicators of trauma that I think once the trauma has become part of us, and we're trying to communicate that we're not okay without actually communicating it. These are some of the ways that we do it, I think. At least I think, whether willingly or unwillingly, I think, cognition as impacted by trauma is something that we don't speak to or acknowledge to ourselves or to others. And we don't want to make the connection that, we're having trouble learning or understanding or focusing because we were traumatized, because that impacts our self-image, that impacts our estimation of ourselves, of our intellect, right? So I think what you said there, Peter, in the depression stage, when trauma becomes a part of you, really is integral. So thank you.
You're welcome. And so what can there's like this fine line, is because for me, and where I've had where my current work is being done is in my childhood trauma. A lot of the work that I've been doing in it keeps pointing to that. And what these traumas can do, it can change your characteristics. Oh, he used to be such a happy little boy or a good kid. Now he's somehow acting out in class and doing all this. We as a young person, we don't get it. We don't understand that. Um, is there at that young age, is there a presence of a mental health condition of some sort? ADD, um, depression at that young age, where it's really hard to find that. Um, is there a history of exposure to you know a series of traumatic events at that younger age? Um, what is a person's background or training or ability to approach handling all these emotions that come slamming us as we grow older, teenagers, and then into adulthood? We tend to bring a lot of that to the our space today, and really don't understand, like, wow, why is all this stuff here? Where we're smarter, we have more wisdom, we have the ability to start looking at these things and get the help for them. So this fine line thing that can start to happen is, from you know a traumatized person. I won't use victim, because victim is just another little trap to keep us stuck in that mode. um, we were traumatized by something. Um, but then, if we're living in the trauma and we understand there's these behaviors that go on, another type of trauma for me, for sure, was self-inflicted, because I didn't know how to handle it, who to handle it with. I didn't want to deal with it. So some of the things that I had done, some of the behavior, some of the actions, um, some of the non-action, really caused some havoc in my world. So because of, like, what are those responses? anger, fear, sadness, shame, confusion, anxiety, um, feeling those feelings of hopelessness, guilt, and you know, as having a relationship, having children, bringing those particular things into that particular relationship, particularly for me, created a very difficult situation for my wife at the time and ultimately my children. And so, and I didn't know what to do. By the time I went to go get some help with, we just called it depression at that time.
Mhm.
The pretty much that self-infliction part it was already done. So I was, there was another trauma from a divorce, so it
Yeah.
was like this self-inflicted situation.
Well, if I may,
Yeah.
this trauma that we have during childhood, that um, I don't know, that shapes who we are to a certain extent, is hardwired, and it becomes hardwired. It's not necessarily genetic, but it becomes a part of our structure physiologically. It becomes part of who we are. And I'm reading this book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. And he uses a word when he's talking about trauma as uh, he uses sclerotic. So, and that means to become rigid, to lose the ability to adapt. And I think that's just the perfect word to go with trauma, because when somebody undergoes any one of the three types or stages of trauma, that's what happens, and it becomes part of you, like you pointed to, Peter, and it becomes hardened in your veins, in your bones. You develop these physiological responses, these um, these automatic reflexes when it comes to a situation which may be as benign as walking in a field of butterflies, but you don't know what maybe one of those butterflies could have, fangs. You don't know. You don't know. You can't trust anything because you're so hardwired to not trust, to not take anything uh, at face value, or even if somebody comes out and says, "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you. You're going to be okay." No deal, no dice. Like we're just we've developed a trust block. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. um I was also looking at, um we have being able to identify, I guess, some of these things. What could be things as simple as headaches, digestive problems, tired all the time, racing heart, feeling jumpy. Um, Sometimes people will experience what they call, hyper arousal. It's when you feel that you're in a constant state of alertness.
Mm-hmm.
I found that in my work that I've been doing was I was constantly in that mode. In I was just constantly on. Hear a knock at the door, hear a little tree branch hit the window, or hear a car door slam out there. Or it was just always, oh, somebody's coming, somebody's here, something's gonna be taken away. And I was like that for, well, lately in the last 2.5 years or so. That was most of my existence in that hyper alert, and it really changes your brain. And Um, it took it, taking work to go ahead and kind of try to shut that down. And but it's so worth it. I'm telling you, you can tell when you're in a calmer mode, because being hyper alert, all you want to do is, hide in your room, darken the windows, pull the covers over your head, and just stay. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I was in to talk about some of my trauma. I was in a car accident, and when I was 16, and it was pretty serious. I was in the hospital for a month and all these things, but I wasn't ever afraid to ride in a car or anything like that. But I remained vigilant about my physical safety and any risk that I would perceive, or any perceived risk that I would come across. Like even jumping or stepping down from a curb that I thought was too high was a threat. So everything was threatening. Everything had the specter of physical damage and pain. And so I lived like that for decades. I lived like that. But yeah, I know how exhausting that can be mentally and physically, because your body holds your emotions just like your heart and your mind does. And so your body is constantly tense. You're physically worn out, you're mentally worn out, but you can't stop because you don't know what's going to be around the next corner. Even if you're on a straight line and there are no corners, something's going to jump out at you. Yeah, and from and from my childhood, I had a lot of. There was a period where there were several deaths of relatives, and that like informed me that you're not going to get too close to anybody because they're just going to leave. So there was a lot of isolation, and so from that, compounded by the accident, like I'm alone, scared, rigid, and hyper aware going forward on this straight line, and it was exhausting.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Keep
sorry.
going.
No,
You go.
I was just going to ask you. You talk about therapy and how it's helped you, and I was wondering if there are any specific trauma therapies that you could point to for anybody listening who may be interested.
Yeah, I I would say it's funny, that sorcotic, is that what that word was?
Sclerotic.
Sclerotic. Okay. So, um, I definitely lived like that, very rigid, not open to many things. Um, and I had that early on. They sent a psychiatrist into school when I was in grade school and had to go meet with her on a regular basis, weekly. And she couldn't get through. I think she just threw up her hands and just couldn't get through. I wouldn't let her in. But when I grew up, I became, therapy was bad. Um, all the, chiropractic was ridiculous. Um, the acupuncture is hocus pocus. Doesn't, it's just a joke. Um, and, therapy, I went to therapy, saw a variety of different doctors. And the key thing for that is that if one therapy person doesn't connect with you, then find another one. Don't let that one be the answer to, oh, it's never going to work for me. You have to search out, you have to try them on, just like you try shoes on and clothes on. Well, I found a therapist, and one of the key things was what we call, cognitive therapy, which is simply just talk therapy. allows me to talk out loud and get what's going on inside here out into the air. It does two things. It allows the therapist to understand you more, understand how you're thinking, and with their training, they can see what that is. That is a reaction to this or a reaction to that, or this is how his brain is processing these things. The other part of that, and I think that's why uh, I've been in 12-step groups and meetings. The other part of that is when it's in here for me, when it's in my brain, it's like a scrambled mess and it just jumps all over the place, firing everywhere. I don't, can't grab it. It's gone. It's there. It's just all scrambled up. But if I speak it, I don't really know how to say this. Hopefully it makes sense. When I speak it out into the air, then I hear it and I can process it better. Like, oh, I'm just talking BS now, or that's really not true, or wow, yes, that's how I feel. So the cognitive therapy can be of great value depending on what I call the driver, which is the therapist, where we make that connection. They understand, what you're going through, and they really kind of steer you here, steer you there, never tell you, you need to do this or whatever. The other one that has been of great value to me, and I have many more sessions to do on this particular things, is it's called EMDR. Edward, Michael, David, Robert. That is short for eye movement desensitizing and reprocessing. And that is just I saw EMDR, and when I saw E, it's like, oh, that's electrical. They want to zap you or something. Definitely has nothing to do with that, which that is called ECT. That's for severe people, schizophrenia, severe depression, things like that. But EMDR has, allowed me to take traumatic experiences through my lifetime that I would wake up and every day, and that trauma that happened 30 years ago was active. It was as if it happened yesterday. And I had one particular thing for that that I carried from 16 years old until I was 58 years old when I did this EMDR on this particular issue. And it ruined every relationship that I had in marriages. It ruined them all because I'll put it right out there, because I was in love with someone all those years. That's how it stuck in my brain, and I couldn't give that love to the person I was with at the time. And up until 58 years old, I walked through this EMDR thing, and I tell you, it processed it through my brain, so it wasn't a daily struggle to look for them in a crowd, or if I was out anywhere, looking around to see is that person going to be there?
Yeah.
It was, and this process of how it worked, it's very simple, non-invasive. It just lets your brain work. And so EMDR is really helped me. And then, of course, there are certain um, others where the you can do, acupoint, acupuncture. Um, there's touch therapies, Reiki. Um,
Hmm.
so whatever, to just know that there are therapies out there. Um, one of the, I think the biggest things that really saved my life from a lot is medication.
Mm.
Um, medication alone can't cure trauma or PTSD. It's in conjunction with strong therapy, diligence, and understanding, being taking care of yourself, little exercise, eating better. All those things are kind of combined with that. But treatment is out there, and it has great value. And there are, can we just do just a quick break right now?
Of
And
course. Of course.
I am going to, I've got a little computer thing.
Well, I guess while we're breaking, I'll just keep rambling.
Yeah.
If that's okay. One of the things that, trauma, I brought up that word sclerotic, becoming rigid, and kind of set in our ways, um, to make that term a bit more accessible. We do that. And in that way, I think we start to become inauthentic. We start to live inauthentically because we know who we want to be, but we put all these roadblocks up that prevent us from being that person. And when I was a young girl, there was an older woman who was my dad dated, and she always used to say, "I want to be just like you when I grow up." And I thought that was the coolest thing because I was, as a young girl, I was kind of fearless, but then all these things happened to me, and I started to think, well, I'm still that 7-year-old, 6, 7-year-old girl who can do anything, but I have to keep her safe, right? I can't really be her because even though she can, take over the world if she wants to, I have to keep her safe. So we're just gonna develop another personality, develop another persona, and we'll just live that way until it's safe for 6 or 7-year-old Rebecca to come out and take over the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, because of that, and then compounded trauma, the trauma load that I began to carry, kept pushing back, the release date, the debut of 6 or 7-year-old Rebecca until indefinitely, right? So I think we begin to live in this inauthentic manner, and that inauthenticity becomes our authenticity in a tragic turn, ironic turn of events. And we detach from who we were, and we become these almost like avatars, but it's not a game, it's not a game, but they're avatars. They're just like exteriorized personalities that we present. And whether the person that I presented until recently was someone who was confident and sure of herself, definitely was not the case. So
Yeah. So it's like, that I'm back, by the way. the that term when you said that, it's like, it's like the term outside looking in. More so, I think for me was I was inside looking out at this thing that was doing my bidding. I was
Mm,
always in there, but it was like, gosh, that's not, it's really not me who I'm presenting, to the world.
yeah.
And I think the one of the bigger things in our discussions that we were talking about with trauma and things like that, I think the worst thing that I can do is say, because I had it all, the family, the bullies, the authority figures at the private schools I went to, the list can go on and on. But for me to go to blame X person X does such a disservice to my process to help me move forward, and does a disservice to them as well, because I have no idea, or at a time in time I did learn a lot where, man, they had their own trauma. You mentioned generational trauma. What happened to them, and what happened to their parents and the parents before them, and how did all these things kind of come down the way? And um, I decided to look at it today. You know what? I'm still here today. I'm able to do a podcast. I've got children that I adore, and the because I've done the work, I stop the blaming, the curse, uh, try to end that generational curse,
Mm-hmm.
and so this individual blame thing is just, I think it, and you mentioned roadblocks. It's just another roadblock for me to go forward. And once I remove that roadblock, I don't actually remove it. I replace it. I place it over here. So when I decide, when I get into some whatever mindset, I hit that and say, can't go back that way.
Mm,
There's no sense in going back that way. Just keep moving forward. Because if I look at just particularly my family, how we grew up and everything, they're all fantastic miracles, and they love me, I love them, and we all have our stuff, and it's as simple as that.
mm-hmm.
And to go back and blame, trying to hang on to, gosh, that one bully that really bullied me, physically abused me, and beat me up all the time. Really? Okay. I've got the pile of trauma, and so it's mine now, and
Yeah.
I'm responsible for it, and I'm responsible to go ahead and work on it and get rid of it. So that's been a real eye opener for me, and so that's kind of what hit me when I was talking about that and some of the things you had said there.
So you mentioned blame, and I blame myself for everything ever that's ever been done wrong to any person on the planet. It's all my fault. When children who suffer abuse are often told, well, this is your fault. Don't tell anybody. This is your fault. It's going to be your fault. You're going to be blamed, etc. So that's number one. And number two, like I mentioned earlier, I was in this car accident when I was a teenager, and I never blamed anybody for that because it was my fault. Why was it my fault? I was in the back seat and I didn't have a seatbelt on. I probably was doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing, but it was ultimately my fault because it was my choices that brought me there, and it doesn't matter that I had been traumatized and thereby conditioned to internalize blame and responsibility for everything. Everything was always my fault, even when, I underwent trauma later. It's still all my fault because my decisions are the things that brought me to the space in which I was traumatized. So it's been really hard for me to let go of that because I like to be in control of everything. And it's really hard for me to give up ownership of that trauma. I'm very protective of it, and I'm very territorial about it. Nobody can know about it. Nobody can relate to it. Nobody can understand. The origin of the trauma is me. I am the origin. And it's just, I have I'm really, really struggling with how to acquit myself of that blame.
Yeah. What are some of the things that, holding on to it? Why do you think you or we tend to do that? What's the, what's the, what's the, is there comfort there, or is there um, familiarity there?
I think there's definitely familiarity. And I think from that comfort, I think also for me in particular, I want to blame myself for everything because I can't imagine somebody in my life who knows me or somebody in the world who doesn't know me, a perfect stranger, would want to do harm to the extent of traumatizing somebody. Would be so callous or evil or cruel as to intentionally inflict anything that would result in long-lasting, chronic, or acute trauma. So I want to think the best of people. And I think that's why I but I tend to blame myself for everything. And it's comfort because I know this culprit. I know my ins and outs, and I know, I know my tricks, and I know, so it's definitely comfort and familiarity for me, and control, because I can control the narrative. I can control how I deal with it. Nobody has to know. Secretiveness is a big thing too, because if I'm to blame, nobody has any authority or privilege, so nobody has to know. Nobody's gonna know. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. It
Okay.
does. Because I guess I see it as, and I think when I talk about a variety of different topics, addiction, um, trauma, depression, anxiety, um, the and maybe it's the rigidity that happens too, is that we come to trust that because it's so familiar, and we always know what it is when we're living in it, and we process everything through that particular lens. You remove the lens, and then what happens? It's like, oh my gosh, now I have to trust this new process. Trust wasn't really high on my list, of things. Forgiveness, faith that it's going to work out. Well, I can hang on to this and kind of be, even though it is kind of tearing me up and affects others, and limits possibilities for me. um I migrated to it so many times. And so breaking free of that has been wonderful for me, to where, yeah, I don't want to be there. I'd rather be out, where, I'm freer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. That, hello, Moto. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, trust the trauma, right? Like
Yep.
the trauma is going to keep you safe for a little bit. And that's yeah, I think that's a large part of what I know for me led to my my alcohol use,
Mm-hmm.
because that was a way to mediate uh mediate what I was going through, I think. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to deal with whatever my trauma was, or the whole trauma load, the whole pile of trauma that I had on my back. I was able to lighten it a bit by taking control, by drinking, which seems oxymoronic, but
Yeah.
yeah,
And self-medicate.
yeah,
It shuts down a lot of the thoughts and the feelings and the ramblings of the traumatic brain. I was looking at a number of things in this research, and um, I have a, how the brain responds to trauma.
mhm,
If I could go into that a little bit. Um, it's really that, our brain is really an amazing thing. Um, Obviously does everything for us,
mm,
controls everything, our hands, our speech. Um, it Our brain makes us who we are, and it gets programmed in such a way that that's who we are. But we can reprogram that, and it's almost like at times we can feel like we're fighting a constant battle with our brain,
mm,
because we've experienced this trauma and abuse, serious injury, again, natural disasters. Um, there's a risk of developing, the post traumatic stress disorder. And, we don't have to be in a war zone, and things like that, to where, PTSD is so prevalent and so horrible. But people, in our daily lives, living through, certain traumas, we're susceptible to it, and it just affects the way our brain is. There are just some specific areas of the brain that are impacted by traumatic events. Um, the first one is the amygdala, and its job is to control our emotions for survival instincts, memory. Um, this area of the brain is for the fight or flight response. Um, some who have experienced a trauma, the amygdala can become hyperactive, making us intensely aware of everything around them, things we've already covered before. But that's that part of the brain that does that. Um, it's Our brain. It's a way of making sure that we're either able to get away from people, places, events that may cause us harm,
mhm,
and can make it very difficult for us to relax, sleep, enjoy activities outside the comfort zone. That's where, for me, a lot of my trauma was stuck there. And through that EMDR process, it processes it through, um, to where the second thing was the hippocampus, and it's the area of our brain for learning and memory. So The amygdala is where it is and stays and starts, and hopefully it doesn't stay, but through the EMDR process, it gets to and it becomes a memory.
Okay.
So yeah, there people have had experienced traumatic events, that have a smaller hippocampus, so physiology is there, than others that haven't and don't have a smaller one. So that can be a factor. Research has shown us that due to hormones that are released when someone experiences frequent high level stress, cortisol.
Mm-hmm.
I have bouts of this particular release of cortisol when a stressful event is pending. And it makes me just going to the store, coming back from the store, and then having to basically, I'm dry heaving in the driveway because it was just so intense, and I was just going to buy my ding dongs and a gallon of milk,
Yeah.
And then the third area of the brain that's impacted is the prefrontal cortex, and it's responsible for regulating our emotions. Now, all of these have been programmed in such a way through our trauma, through our lifetime. But we can always, through treatment, cognitive therapy, alternate therapies, all kinds of different things, we have the ability to really reprogram the brain away from the way it is now. We can actually change the physiology of our brain by positive thought, different therapies, all kinds of those things. It's an amazing thing.
It certainly is. I read about this HPA axis. It's hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And it is a neuroendocrine mechanism that mediates the effects of stressors by regulating physiological processes. And this is a component of the brain that is affected by it can be overloaded and warped. So yeah, it can.
So it's just not, we're emotionally weak or fragile or whatever. It can be, it gets to be, it's a physical thing, it's a psychological thing, and but there's a way out, there's a way forward. There truly is, and Rebecca and I are examples of that have lived through some things, and want to put this information out there just simply to help others, help people get on a path, to take a look at it, to move forward, live a little bit, live a better life, and have better relationships. And it's really important for us that we're able to do this, because it's not something that is real simple, putting us out there, because we have, the way our brains are wired. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful information and this opportunity to talk about trauma and how it's impacted my life, for sharing how it's impacted your life, and hopefully, how we can come out on the other side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so just remember, again, I'm Peter. I have a podcast. I'm on Twitter, Creating Hope Together. Join me there. My podcast is on Spotify, Anchor. Just Google Creating Hope Together, and you'll be able to find that. and we're going to hopefully start doing some more things on YouTube and things like that. But the key thing is get as much information as you can, and reach out to us if you want. And then Rebecca, what's your handle and all that on?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I think my handle is @CalamityReebs. The podcast is Recover Yourself. The same handle for Instagram. I think that's hashtag. I'm not sure. Calamity Reebs. Just look that up. But yeah, my podcast will be on Spotify and iTunes, and I'll post a link on Twitter and also a link to my website. So, and any questions, concerns, comments, if you just need to vent about anything, I'm always here to listen and, give as much support as I can.
Gotcha. Do you want to try to stop recording, stay on after? I got a couple of things for you after.
All right.
All right.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day, all. Hope this helped you.
Bye.